Welcome back to another Colors of Prog. And since I'm pre-recording a lot of these shows, this will air sometime in late August. And I just wanted to thank everyone for watching, listening to me. I'm Louis Paul, by the way, in case you didn't know my name. And it's a great pleasure to discuss and talk about, in some cases, well, all cases, review these progressive rock artists and recordings, because there's so much of it out there from the past and the present and what's going on right now currently. And it's just such a big thing. This is such a resurgence in progressive music, alongside the older bands that are still around. From the 70s, 60s, 80s, and but I also like to discuss the new bands, the current bands, and so I hope most of you are enjoying this. It's a lot of work, but I do enjoy doing it, and so there's so much of this material out there. I could be doing this ad infinitum forever. But, we'll see how it goes. But thank you again for watching. So we're going to jump into Atomic Rooster. Yeah. There's a killer album cover there. Death Walks Behind You, 1970, UK band. So originally Vince Crane played keyboards, Carl Palmer, drummer, and bass player Nick Graham were in Arthur Brown's band and played on The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. Everybody pretty much knows of that album, and it's pretty much a watershed album in rock history and in prog rock. It's got everything. It's experimental, it's unusual, it's strange. And they actually had a hit off of that called Fire, which was covered by many other artists in later years. Sort of considered a heavy psychedelic classic. The trio left and formed Atomic Rooster. And Nick Graham, who was playing bass, went over to lead vocals. Oddly enough, John Ducan, who was in other bands, one called Andromeda, joined, and after the first pressing of the first Atomic Rooster album, they mixed in, which is pretty much unheard of today, this would not happen. They mixed in John Ducan's lead vocals, and they mixed in his guitar, because the band at that time didn't really have a guitar player. And for pressings on going forward after the first pressing, it was almost a different sounding album. And then Carl Palmer left to join Emerson, Lake and Palmer, ELP. And so here's where it gets really weird. Apparently, Vince Crane and John Ducan did not get along well. They had a kind of tumultuous relationship in and out of the studio, so I'm assuming in the studio and on stage. And the band is very strange. The psychedelic blues rock was what it was. They brought in, after Palmer left, they brought in a new drummer named Paul Hammond, and then we had Death Walks Behind You, leaving them as a trio. So released in 1970, it makes them sound larger than a trio. But they don't sound like ELP. They're a heavy rock band. Aside from bands like Deep Purple and Zeppelin at that time and place, this is sort of like one of the places where heavy metal began. I'm not going to say heavy metal began with Atomic Rooster, but in the early days, this is certainly one of those early bands, Sabbath, etc. Unfortunately, I wasn't the biggest fan of this band then, but I revisited Atomic Rooster, and even now I'm still not the biggest fan of Atomic Rooster. But apparently Vince Crane and John Ducan, they had their ups and downs, and so they brought in a new singer, or rather Vince brought in a new singer named Peter French, and the bass player left, so now we had a band with no bass player. So much sounding like the Doors, Vince Crane would play the bass pedals on the keyboard for the bass effect. Think about what Ray Manzarek did with the Doors. This must have been a bitch playing line, but I guess audiences are used to that heavy sound. So in hearing of Atomic Rooster, followed, I believe this is also 1970 or 71. This actually has a Roger Dean cover, and you'll notice that unusual for most of what Roger Dean had done, this is not his usual style. This is early Roger Dean. He also did the logo for Virgin Records about this time, the beginning of Virgin Records, and then he was hired to do the logo for that. And I'll show that later. I actually own the artwork, or a copy of the artwork, a lithograph of it. So in hearing of is interesting because midway through the recording, John Ducan left. Vince Crane wiped his vocals and guitar almost entirely, except for like 3 or 4 tracks. New singer Peter French, who I mentioned, comes in, lays down new vocals. It's still heavy rock, but it has a more playful, funky vibe to it. It just moves a lot better. It's got an uncredited horn section. You can obviously hear the horns going here. I tried to research and find out, so who's the horn section on this? I could not find anything. I think it's a more fun, listenable album than Death Walks Behind You, which I'm sure the death metal people love for the record cover alone and the title, but in hearing of, I enjoyed more. But the next year, 1972's Made in England, an entire change-up of the band. Vince Crane is the only remaining member. Well, it's his band. And he brought in Chris Follow from Colosseum, the legendary soul singer and crooner. And entirely different sound. Entirely different sound. A lot of people don't like the Chris Follow singing on Atomic Rooster. He's got an incredible range, almost operatic at times. I'll get to the Chris Follow Atomic Rooster another time, but right now, so Death Walks Behind You and in hearing of, is it prog? I would say by a thin marginal association, but not really. Would I say you have to buy it? If you liked heavy rock, if you liked hard rock from the early 70s, late 60s, that transitional period, you might be interested. Also, I'm sure you can find clips to listen to online and see if you want to indulge. For myself, not really. So next, Ayeron. Actually going to mention 2 of these. Here's the other one. So this is the Universal Migrator, parts 1 and 2. This is from 2007. And the Human Equation from 2004. Formed in the Netherlands by multi-instrumentalist Arjen Anthony Lucassen, Ayeron is Ayeron creates vaguely religious-themed rock operas that often seem to dwell on darkness. So right away, we're appealing to a different kind of audience orally. There's a touch of sci-fi in the lyrics and imagery, using dark metal as its base. Lucassen picks from an impressive talent pool of metal and prog metal players. These albums feature members of Opeth, Psychotic Waltz, Pain of Salvation, Dream Theater, so you get the idea where this is from. Both of these are double CD sets, close to 2 hours apiece. So Human Equation does feature Ken Hensley from Uriah Heep and Oliver Wakeman, brief tenure with Yes, and takes place in the year 2084, after much of mankind has been wiped out by an apocalypse. Yay! A tad less dark and gruesome as its theme would suggest, there are classic rock elements. There are touches of Floyd, Beatlesque harmonies, and like even Neil Morris guests on lead vocals on The First Man on Earth. You can obviously hear Neil on this song. But at nearly 2 hours each, these CDs, I just found Ayeron to be tiresome and grating to listen to. And I'll tell you why. Off-putting were the occasionally shouting or growled vocals nearly inclined me to eject the CD and send it flinging through the window into the street. Really. Thrash and doom metal do not mix well with prog. It's not an issue with me personally. You're one or the other. It doesn't show me that you are talented or multi-talented or are so good you can do music in other genres. You pick one or the other or both or several. Progressive rock and prog metal kind of slinks into there. One of the many issues I had with music of this kind was I was seeing the band Riverside, which has a lot of fans. I'm not going to be reviewing them today. And Riverside, I quite enjoyed their set of music, and then they would start growling and like demonic voices. If you want to show emotion in your song, there are other ways to do this. Growling like freaked out, possessed by the demon, beast. Just makes me want to go turn around and leave. But anyway, so there are fans of Ayeron out there who say this is brilliant work, some of the best they've ever heard. Well, good for you. You might really I've been through this phase earlier in my life where I liked bands like this. When it was metal, when it was dark metal, when it was gloom and doom. And when I listened to other music at that time, that music was within its own universe and idiom. So, okay, I've given them credit for trying to extend beyond the progressive rock, let's say, window or elements, but I really did not like Ayeron that much, and others do, but my own personal opinion. Next, we're going to jump to Amon Duul 2. Live in London. As nice as this looks. Whoa. This is actually a 1973 gig. Re-released 2021. Actually, released in 2007, re-released in 2021. So Amandu recorded a club gig at the Hippodrome in 1973. It's not the best live sounding record from this German band, who did some terrific to me and to others recordings. Phallus Die in 1969, Yeti in 1970, Amandu too. I mean, great stuff. It's essentially the same band as on those two classic recordings. It's experimental, trance-like. The vibes are there, but the record succumbs to a chaotic, often improvised sounding clash of music. Sometimes Renata Knopf's vocals flit between the folksy warbling and conjuring demons. Crazy, huh? So it's striking. So this must have been the tour for those two albums, the international tour, probably the latter, Yeti, and this is a London show, but wow, live, they were so chaotic. You could say that of a lot of bands associated with the, how do we say, the krautrock genre, that live, they were experimental, yes, and chaotic at some points, but this just veers on WTF realm. I wasn't a fan of this. I was actually disappointed on this Live in London disc, and you may be too, but do not let that prevent you from purchasing this and putting money into the coffers. We have a lot of things like that to show, but hey, not every show is going to be, this is amazing, this is great, right? Formula 3. Italian band. Irae, 1970. Tony Ciccio, vocals and drums. Gabriele Lorenzi, vocals and bass and keyboards. Alberto Radius, vocals, guitars, and bass. This is proof that not every album from an Italian band is golden, right? This is the first recording by the trio Formula 3, and it's definitely one of the more garage rock, psychedelic offerings I've listened to in a while. While they may not have turned to progressive rock for about 2 more years, 1972 Sagnando, and 1973's La Grande Casa. This is good if you really want to hear a close enough to good English language cover of Walk Away Renee by the Left Bank. Garage rock aficionados and psychedelic buffs will really enjoy this. Remember when I'm covering a lot of these early Italian rock bands, Italian progressive rock bands, they did start off in the garage, psychedelic, experimental field, because prog rock didn't really come over for another year or two, and then everybody's covering Toll and Yes and Influenced by. But we don't have, by a lot of these Italian progressive rock bands, earliest recordings available to us. So I guess in that case, this is historically interesting. Here's one Italian band, and we get to hear what they sound like before they sort of went prog. So with that being said, a few years later, 1974 in fact, 2 of the band members were in the band Il Volo, This is much more in the 1974, much more on the RPI, Italian progressive rock sound that we know and love. And except something happened. Il Volo, the band and the album, just didn't catch on. And unfortunate as it was, this is actually a CD gold disc, which is nice. The sound was quite nice on this release from Italy on BMG, of all people, worldwide release. Sorry, not worldwide. We would have known about them here. No, it was an Italian release on BMG, but it's really nice sounding. Very nice in the traditional Italian prog rock sound. But Il Volo just didn't make it. And so they reunited about 20 years later, more or less, for a one-off album. And again, that came and went without much ado, although it sounded quite like the band that was here, and the music was not too dissimilar from what's on the first Il Volo album. Although surprisingly, they reunite occasionally. There's also Formula 3, some band members reunite occasionally, but Il Volo I had seen recently listed in Italian prog rock festivals. So one never knows, there might be some new music coming from Il Volo or from Formula 3, the later incarnation. So that's it for today. So yeah, Atomic Rooster, Ayeron, the Amandu, I really could not recommend enthusiastically. The Formula 3 mixed on, but the Il Volo, yes, I would say it's definitely worth checking out. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back again soon.